Welcome to Stories of HFY, your ultimate destination for thrills, adventure, and entertainment. Hit subscribe and turn on the bell to join us on this epic journey. Let's create unforgettable moments together. The moment her eyes met his, the world seemed to hold its breath. The chaos that swirled around them, the blaring alarms, the shouts of fear, the crumbling structures, all faded into a still, surreal silence. It was as if time itself paused to acknowledge the significance of the moment. For Kala, it wasn't just a meeting of gazes, it was an unspoken declaration of fate. This stranger, who had appeared as if conjured by the storm, was somehow central to everything. The city was collapsing. What had started as a minor tremor had escalated into an unprecedented disaster. The earth beneath their feet buckled with violent force, sending buildings tumbling like a house of cards. People scrambled for safety, their cries mingling with the groans of shattering concrete. But amid the pandemonium, Kala's focus remained on the man standing across the fractured plaza. His presence was magnetic, his piercing blue eyes brimming with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. He didn't look panicked like everyone else. He looked resolute, as though he had been waiting for this exact moment. Kala's instinct screamed at her to move, to run, to find shelter. Instead, she stood rooted to the spot, her heart hammering in her chest. A jagged crack snaked its way across the ground between them, splitting the earth like a living thing. Dust and debris filled the air, but she couldn't tear her eyes away. Then he spoke. "Kala," he called out, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. How did he know her name? The question barely formed in her mind before another tremor shook the ground, nearly knocking her off her feet. She stumbled but caught herself just in time to see him extend a hand toward her. "You have to trust me," he said, his voice steady despite the cacophony around them. "I'm here to help you." Something in his tone made her believe him, even though every logical part of her brain screamed that it was impossible. She didn't know this man, had never seen him before, yet he felt familiar in a way she couldn't explain. With a deep breath, she took a tentative step forward, her legs trembling with a mix of fear and adrenaline. As she reached for his hand, another violent quake struck. The ground beneath her gave way, and she let out a terrified cry as she began to fall. But before she could plummet into the abyss, his strong grip closed around her wrist, yanking her back to safety. For a brief moment they were face to face, their breaths mingling in the dust-filled air. "Who are you?" she managed to whisper, her voice barely audible over the roaring destruction. His reply was enigmatic. "Someone who's been looking for you for a very long time." Before she could ask anything more, he pulled her into motion, guiding her through the crumbling streets with a sense of purpose that bordered on supernatural. He seemed to know exactly where to go, dodging falling debris and navigating the chaos with uncanny precision. Kala struggled to keep up, her mind racing with questions. Who was he? How did he know her name? And why did she feel as though their meeting was anything but a coincidence? As they reached the relative safety of a partially intact building, the man finally stopped. He released her hand and turned to face her, his expression a mixture of urgency and determination. "Listen to me carefully," he said, his voice low but firm. "You're in danger, Kala. This isn't just an earthquake, it's the beginning of something much bigger. And you're the key to stopping it." She stared at him, her chest heaving as she tried to process his words. "The key? What are you talking about? I don't understand." "You will," he promised, his gaze unwavering. "But first you need to remember." "Remember what?" she demanded, frustration bubbling to the surface. "I don't even know who you are." "You know me," he said quietly, his words carrying an undeniable weight. "You just don't remember yet. But you will." Before she could press him further, a deafening roar shook the air. The building trembled violently and cracks began to spread across the walls. The man's eyes widened and he grabbed her arm. "We have to move. Now." He pulled her out of the building just as it collapsed behind them, the sound of shattering glass and crumbling stone echoing in their wake. They sprinted through the rubble-strewn streets, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. Kala's legs burned with exertion, but she pushed herself to keep going, driven by an inexplicable trust in the stranger who seemed to know her better than she knew herself. As they reached the edge of the city, the ground gave one final, cataclysmic shudder. Behind them, the skyline crumbled into a massive cloud of dust and debris. Calla turned to look, her heart sinking at the sight of her home reduced to ruins. But there was no time to mourn. The man's hand on her shoulder brought her back to the present. "It's not over," he said grimly. "This was just the beginning." She met his gaze, her mind swirling with questions and emotions she couldn't begin to untangle. "What do we do now?" His expression softened, a flicker of something like regret crossing his features. "We find the others," he said. "And we prepare for what's coming." Calla didn't know what lay ahead or why this man seemed to hold all the answers. But as she stood there, staring into the uncertain future, she felt a spark of determination ignite within her. Whatever this was, she wouldn't face it alone. Together, they would uncover the truth and confront the storm that loomed on the horizon. The air was electric with tension, each breath carrying the weight of impending disaster. The sirens that wailed through the city seemed to amplify the unease, a grim symphony foretelling the chaos to come. In the heart of it all stood Erin, her fists clenched so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. She could feel it, a storm not of nature but of fate, bearing down on her like a predator stalking its prey. The first explosion shattered the fragile stillness, erupting from the city's central district and sending a fiery plume into the sky. People screamed and scattered like leaves in the wind, their fear palpable as they scrambled for safety. Erin, however, didn't move. She couldn't. Her gaze was locked on the figure emerging from the flames, a shadowy silhouette that exuded menace. It was him. The man she'd been warned about. "Aaron Blake," the man called out, his voice carrying effortlessly over the chaos. It wasn't loud, but it was commanding, each word weighted with a power that made her chest tighten. "You can't run from this. You can't run from me." The urge to flee warred with the instinct to stand her ground. Erin's heart hammered against her ribs as adrenaline surged through her veins. She didn't know his name, but she knew exactly what he was. A harbinger of destruction. Ever since the strange markings had appeared on her wrist 3 weeks ago, she'd felt like a thread in some vast, incomprehensible web, and now the spider had arrived. Before she could respond, another explosion tore through the street, sending shards of glass and chunks of concrete raining down. Erin dove for cover, her shoulders slamming against the cracked pavement. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid stench of burning metal. When she looked up, the man was gone. But his words lingered. "You can't run from me." Erin staggered to her feet, her mind racing. She needed answers. She needed help. Most of all, she needed to get as far away from the city as possible. Yet deep down, she knew escape wasn't an option. This wasn't just her fight anymore. It was everyone's. The safe house was supposed to be a sanctuary. Hidden deep beneath the old subway tunnels, it was a labyrinth of reinforced walls and flickering fluorescent lights. Erin's arrival was met with a mixture of relief and apprehension. "You're late," said Felix, a wiry man with a perpetually furrowed brow. He looked up from the makeshift command center, where a dozen monitors displayed live feeds of the carnage above. "We thought you'd been compromised." "I almost was," Erin admitted, dropping into a chair. Her limbs felt like lead, but her mind was a whirlwind. "He's here, Felix. The one they warned us about." Felix's expression darkened. "Did he see you?" "More than that. He spoke to me." The room fell silent. Even the hum of the monitors seemed to fade as everyone turned to look at her. Felix's jaw tightened, and he exchanged a grim look with Mara, the group strategist. "That means it's starting," Mara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The convergence?" Erin's stomach churned. She'd heard the term before, always spoken in hushed tones, as though saying it too loudly might hasten its arrival. The convergence was the tipping point, the moment when the fragile balance between order and chaos would collapse. And now it seemed she was at the center of it. "What do we do?" Erin asked, her voice trembling despite her efforts to sound strong. Felix leaned against the table, his fingers steepled in thought. "We've been preparing for this," he said. "We've studied the patterns, tracked the anomalies. But if he's made contact with you directly..." He trailed off, shaking his head. "It means we're running out of time." Mara stepped forward, placing a reassuring hand on Aaron's shoulder. Whatever happens, we're in this together. You're not alone. Aaron wanted to believe her. She wanted to trust that the ragtag group of rebels and outcasts could stand against the force bearing down on them. But doubt gnawed at the edges of her resolve. How could they possibly hope to win when their enemy seemed to know their every move? The next attack came at night. It was swift, brutal, and devastatingly precise. Aaron had barely closed her eyes when the ground shook, jolting her awake. Shouts echoed through the tunnels as the safe house's alarms blared. She grabbed her gear and bolted for the command center, her pulse pounding in her ears. "They've breached the perimeter," Felix shouted, his voice hoarse from yelling. The monitors displayed a chilling scene, shadowy figures pouring into the tunnels, their movements eerily coordinated. At their center was the man from the city, his presence like a black hole drawing all attention. "He's leading them," Aaron said, her throat dry. "How does he keep finding us?" Felix didn't answer. He didn't have to. The answer was clear. Somehow the markings on her wrist were a beacon, leading him straight to them. She was the key, just as he'd said. But to what? "We have to fall back," Mara said, grabbing a map and pointing to a secondary escape route. "We can't hold them off here." "We'll never make it in time," Felix argued. "Not with him out there." Aaron's gaze flicked between them, her mind racing. She knew they were right. Staying meant certain death, but running felt like surrender. And yet, what choice did they have? "I'll buy you time," she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "Are you insane?" Felix snapped. "You'll get yourself killed?" "If I don't, we all die," Aaron shot back, her voice firm. "You said it yourself, he's here for me. If I can distract him, you can get everyone else out." Felix hesitated, his jaw clenched. Finally he nodded. "You're braver than I am," he muttered. Mara pressed a small device into Aaron's hand. "Take this. If things go south, use it to create a diversion. And come back to us, okay?" Aaron nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. She turned and sprinted toward the oncoming chaos, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. She didn't know if she'd survive the night, but one thing was certain: she wouldn't go down without a fight. The air crackled with energy, each pulse reverberating like an unspoken warning. On the shattered edge of the city's last standing skyscraper, Aaron stood face to face with the man who had haunted her every waking moment. The world around them was a battlefield. Fires raged, smoke choked the air, and the distant cries of the wounded formed a grim symphony of despair. Yet, in this moment, all of it seemed to fade into the background. There was only him and her, and the weight of what was about to unfold. "You still think you can stop this?" the man asked, his voice smooth and venomous. His dark eyes glinted with amusement, as though the very idea of resistance was laughable. "You've seen what I can do. What makes you think this will end any differently?" Aaron's chest heaved as she struggled to steady her breath. She tightened her grip on the dagger in her hand, its blade glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. "Because I'm not afraid of you anymore," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "And because I'm not fighting alone." The man's smirk faltered for the briefest of moments, and Aaron took it as a sign. She lunged forward, the dagger aimed directly at his chest. But he was faster. He sidestepped her attack with ease, grabbing her wrist and twisting it painfully until she cried out. The dagger clattered to the ground, its glow dimming as it left her grasp. "Foolish," he muttered, shoving her backward. Aaron stumbled but managed to stay on her feet. Her heart pounded with frustration. Every encounter with him felt like a cruel game where the rules were stacked against her. But then, from the shadows behind her, Felix and Mara emerged. Mara's bow was already drawn, an arrow of pure energy crackling against the string. Felix carried a makeshift shield, its surface reinforced with the glowing symbols they'd painstakingly learned to carve. They were battered and bruised, but their eyes burned with determination. "You didn't think she'd come alone, did you?" Felix taunted, raising the shield in a defiant gesture. The man's gaze flickered to them, his expression unreadable. "Courage doesn't equal strength," he said flatly. "You can't win this. None of you can." "Maybe not," Mara replied, her arrow trained on him. "But we're sure as hell going to try." Without warning, she loosed the arrow. It streaked through the air, leaving a trail of crackling light. The man raised a hand, a shimmering barrier of darkness forming just in time to deflect the shot. The impact sent a shockwave through the rooftop, and Erin had to brace herself to keep from being knocked over. "You're only delaying the inevitable," the man snarled, his calm facade beginning to crack. He extended both hands, and the air around him darkened as tendrils of shadow coiled outward, seeking their targets. Erin dove to the side, narrowly avoiding one of the shadowy tendrils as it lashed out where she'd been standing. She grabbed the dagger from the ground and pushed herself to her feet. Mara and Felix were engaged in their own desperate battle, dodging and countering the shadows with whatever means they had. But it was clear they were outmatched. The man was toying with them and they were running out of time. "Erin?" Felix shouted, deflecting another shadowy attack with his shield. "We can't hold him off forever. Whatever you're going to do, do it now." Her mind raced. The dagger in her hand pulsed faintly, as though it was alive and waiting for her command. She knew it wasn't just a weapon, it was a key, a conduit for the power that had been locked within her since the day the markings appeared. But she had no idea how to unleash it. "Trust yourself," Mara's voice echoed in her memory, words spoken in quieter moments. "The power is already yours. You just have to let it in." Erin tightened her grip on the dagger, closing her eyes for a split second amidst the chaos. She focused on the faint hum she felt deep within, the connection between herself and the weapon. When she opened her eyes, they were glowing with the same light as the blade. "Hey!" she yelled, drawing the man's attention. "Why don't you pick on someone who's ready to fight back?" The man turned, a sneer on his face. Bold words for someone who can't even control her own power. "Let's find out," Erin shot back, and then she charged. This time she wasn't fighting blindly. With each step, she felt the power within her surge, guiding her movements. When the man raised his hand to summon another barrier, she slashed through it with the dagger, the glowing blade cutting through the darkness like it was nothing. His eyes widened in shock, but Erin didn't give him a chance to recover. She pressed the attack, each strike pushing him closer to the edge of the rooftop. Felix and Mara joined in, their combined efforts overwhelming the man's defenses. Mara's arrows struck true, forcing him to split his focus, while Felix's shield absorbed the brunt of his counterattacks. Together they drove him back until he was cornered, teetering on the brink. "This isn't over," the man growled, his voice dripping with venom. But Erin could see the fear in his eyes now. For the first time he wasn't in control. "Oh, it's over," Erin said, her voice firm. She raised the dagger, its light now blindingly bright. "For you?" With a final, decisive strike, she plunged the blade into his chest. The rooftop erupted in a blinding explosion of light and shadow, the two forces colliding in a deafening crescendo. Erin felt the ground beneath her tremble as the man's form disintegrated, his scream fading into nothingness. When the light subsided, the rooftop was eerily quiet. The fires in the distance still burned, but the oppressive weight that had hung over the city was gone. Erin dropped to her knees, exhausted but alive. Felix and Mara rushed to her side, their faces etched with relief. "You did it," Felix said, helping her to her feet. "You actually did it?" Erin looked out over the city, her chest heaving. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt like someone who had barely survived. But as the first rays of dawn broke through the smoke-filled sky, she allowed herself a small, weary smile. The battle was over. For now.